My name is Dorothy. I was 69 years old the winter I moved into my son's guest bedroom, and I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened there. I did not go to that house because I was weak. I went because I trusted the boy I raised, and trust, I have learned, is the only currency some people know how to spend without ever paying it back. I broke my hip in November, the kind of fall that sounds almost comedic when you describe it. A wet leaf on the porch step, a missed grip on the railing. And isn't funny at all when you're lying on cold concrete waiting for a neighbor to notice your car hasn't moved. 6 weeks in a rehabilitation facility. A walker I hated. A surgeon who told me, kindly but plainly, that I would need help for a few months while the new joint settled into my body like an uninvited guest of its own. My son Marcus called it, "No question, Mom, you're staying with us." I remember how relieved I felt hearing that. I remember thinking, foolishly, that this was what all those years had been for the late nights, the sacrifices, the version of my life I'd quietly folded up and put away so his could unfold instead. Let me tell you about those years because you need to understand what I gave before I can tell you what was taken. I raised Marcus alone. His father was not a villain, just absent in the ordinary way some men are. First physically, on long-haul trucking routes that got longer and longer, and then permanently in a diner outside Tulsa where his heart simply stopped one Tuesday morning when Marcus was 9. I didn't have savings. I didn't have a pension waiting. What I had was a house with a finished basement and a genuine bone-deep love for small children, so I opened a daycare. Dorothy's Little Learners, the sign said, hand-painted, hung by a neighbor who did it for free because he liked the way I made his granddaughter laugh. For 31 years I ran that daycare. I potty-trained half a generation of this town. I mixed formula in the dark so I wouldn't wake a sleeping baby, learned the Heimlich maneuver on a doll, and then, terrifyingly, on an actual toddler named Ben whose mother still sends me a Christmas card every year. I did all of this while raising Marcus, making sure his school clothes were pressed, his lunch was packed, his homework checked, even when my own eyes were burning with exhaustion by 8 p.m. When it came time for braces, I paid for braces. When it came time for band camp, a summer trip to Washington, D.C., a used Honda Civic with 90,000 miles on it for his 16th birthday, I paid cash, from an envelope I kept in the freezer behind the frozen peas because that's where I'd read the good hiding spots were. And when Marcus got into law school, a genuine real accomplishment that I was prouder of than almost anything else in my life, I sold the daycare's second van and dipped into a retirement account I'd been building since before he was born, and I did it without a single complaint, because that is what you do for the people you love. He married Priya 4 years after he graduated. She was sharp, polished, the kind of woman who always seemed to be photographed mid-laugh at some gallery opening or another. I liked her at first. I wanted to like her. She called me Mom within the first 6 months, brought me candles that smelled like eucalyptus, asked me questions about my daycare stories with what looked at the time like genuine interest. I did not yet understand that interest and appetite can look identical from a distance. So when my hip broke and Marcus said, "You're staying with us," I believed I was walking into safety. I packed 2 suitcases, one with clothes, one with the parts of my life I couldn't leave behind. Photographs, my late husband's watch, the folder of daycare records I still, out of habit, kept updated. I moved into their guest bedroom, a lovely room, honestly, cream walls and a window that caught the morning light just right. And for the first week everyone was kind. The first week is always the easiest one to survive. It's the weeks after that tell you the truth. By the second week, Priya had started a system. A literal chart, taped inside the pantry door, tracking who had contributed what to the household that month. Groceries, utilities, shared expenses. My name appeared at the bottom in smaller handwriting than everyone else's, next to a number that represented my social security check, a number Priya had somehow already gotten from Marcus, who I had never told directly. "It's not personal," she said when she caught me looking at it. "We just believe in transparency around money. Old-fashioned households never did that, and look how that turned out." She said it with a smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes, the kind I would come to recognize as her particular dialect of cruelty. Soft-spoken, reasonable-sounding, and somehow more humiliating than if she'd simply shouted. I want to pause here and tell you something you may already suspect, because you've felt this tightening in your own chest at some point in your life, whether it was in a house like mine or a workplace or a marriage that slowly stopped being kind. When someone begins to treat your presence as a debt, they are usually preparing you for something. I didn't know that yet. I only knew that I had started apologizing for existing in rooms I had every right to be in. My grandson Eli was 7 that year, and he was the only person in that house who still looked at me the way I remembered being looked at a Euro, like I was simply uncomplicatedly someone he loved. He'd climb into the guest bed some mornings before school and tell me long, meandering stories about dinosaurs and his friend Marcus at school who had the same name as Daddy, which is so weird, Grandma. I lived for those 10 minutes more than I lived for anything else that winter. It was late January when the real erosion started. I was using the kitchen counter to steady myself a Euro. My hip still ached in the cold, a deep structural throb that no amount of physical therapy fully erased a Euro. And Marcus looked up from his coffee and said, without any real heat in his voice, which somehow made it worse, "Mom, you know Priya's stressed about money. Maybe it's time to think about whether this is sustainable long-term." Sustainable? As if I were a business initiative. As if I were a line item that had failed to justify its own cost. I told him I was still healing, that my doctor had said 3 to 4 more months, and he nodded, the way you nod at a customer service complaint you have no intention of resolving. Priya, setting a mug down with more force than necessary, added, "We just think it's important you have your own plan, Dorothy. We can't be your retirement plan." I hadn't asked to be anyone's retirement plan. I had asked for 3 months of help after 31 years of giving mine away for free. That night, lying in the guest's bed with Eli's dinosaur book still on the nightstand where he'd left it, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, a Euro running numbers in my head. What I had. What I didn't. Whether I could go home yet, hip or no hip, just to escape the particular exhaustion of being unwanted in a house I was told repeatedly to be grateful for. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere in a folder on Priya's laptop, a different kind of number was already being run. And it had nothing to do with groceries. Here is something I've learned slowly and at great cost. Contempt rarely arrives without a reason attached to it, even when that reason is hidden. People do not simply decide out of nowhere that an elderly parent is a burden. They decide it because deciding it makes something else easier to justify. I didn't understand this yet in February. I understood it completely by April. But let me walk you through how the walls closed in brick by brick the way they always do. Marcus had always had a complicated relationship with what he thought he deserved. As a boy, he watched his classmates arrive at school in new sneakers, go on ski trips over winter break, come back from summer with stories about lake houses that belonged to their families, and not to a week's rental. I never had the money for those things, and I never apologized for it because I believed I still believe that a childhood built on effort and love is not a lesser childhood. But somewhere in his 20s, Marcus began quietly rewriting the story of his own upbringing. My frugality, the thing that had kept a roof over both our heads, became in his retelling evidence of my failure rather than my strength. "You always made it seem like there wasn't a choice," he told me once, during a rare unguarded conversation. "Like we just had to go without. But other moms figured it out." Other moms, he meant, had husbands. Other moms hadn't buried one at 34 with a 9-year-old and a mortgage. I didn't say that. I have spent my whole life not saying things, absorbing them instead. The way a foundation absorbs the weight of a house so the people inside never have to feel it shift. Priya, when she arrived, gave that resentment a shape and a vocabulary. She talked about generational wealth transfer and legacy planning the way other people talk about the weather, a Euro, casually, constantly, as though it were simply the ambient condition of modern life rather than a subject she circled with real hunger. She'd ask me questions that seemed innocent in the moment and only later, lined up end to end, revealed themselves as reconnaissance. "Do you still have the house on Larkspur, Dorothy? What's it worth now, do you think? Did you ever set up a trust, or does everything just go through probate? You should really let me help you organize your paperwork, a Euro." My mother's estate was such a nightmare because nothing was labeled. I answered these questions honestly, the way you answer a daughter-in-law who says she's just trying to help, because refusing to answer felt paranoid, felt unkind, felt like exactly the kind of old-fashioned suspicion Priya liked to imply I was prone to. By March, the daily insults had sharpened into something with an edge you could actually feel. Marcus started calling me a walking expense report in front of Eli, which made the boy laugh in the confused, uncertain way children laugh when they sense cruelty but don't yet have a name for it. Priya took to sighing loudly whenever I used what she called the good pans. As though 31 years of cooking for other people's children had somehow left me unqualified to touch cookware. She told me once with that same too-sweet smile, that my social security check was casserole money, €1 barely covering the flour, she said, as if 40 years of feeding people, first for a living and then for love, amounted to a rounding error in her household budget. I want to tell you about the day I overheard the sentence that changed everything, because I've turned it over in my mind so many times since that I could recite it in my sleep. I was in the hallway outside the study, moving slowly, my cane tapping softly against the hardwood, when I heard Priya's voice through the half-open door, low and clipped, the register she used for phone calls she didn't want overheard. She's old-fashioned in a sweet way, Priya was saying, and I actually smiled for half a second, thinking she was defending me to someone. It's a nice way of saying she's not going to notice. I stood very still. The POA paperwork is basically done, she continued. Marcus thinks it's just standard protocol for the surgery, so he signed off without really reading it. She trusts him. She'll sign whatever he puts in front of her. I did not move. I did not breathe, I think, for a full 10 seconds. Then I did what I have done my entire life when confronted with something too large to process immediately, €1. I turned around quietly and went back to the guest bedroom, and I told myself I had misheard. That's a particular kind of self-betrayal, the misheard excuse, and I want you to recognize it if you've ever used it on yourself, because it is rarely true. We hear things perfectly well. We simply aren't ready yet to know what we heard. 2 days later, Marcus came to me with a folder of papers, exactly as Priya had promised he would. Just some standard stuff for your surgery follow-up care, he said, not quite meeting my eyes, the way he used to when he was a boy and had done something he knew disappointed me. Power of attorney, just for medical decisions and bill paying while you're recovering. Priya's handling most of it, €1. You know how she loves being organized. I did not have my reading glasses. I remember that detail with a specific aching clarity, because it feels now like the hinge the entire disaster swung on. I asked Marcus to read me the important parts, and he did in the flat, hurried voice of a man reading terms and conditions he has no intention of actually explaining. I signed where he told me to sign. I trusted my own son to tell me the truth about a document he had, by his own admission through that study door, not even bothered to read himself. That is the particular tragedy of trust, €1. It doesn't require the other person to be a monster. It only requires them to be careless in exactly the moment carelessness will cost you everything. The insults, I understand now, were never really about money in the way they pretended to be. Priya didn't actually believe my social security check was insufficient for groceries. Marcus didn't actually think I was a walking expense report. Those were pressure applied at the surface, designed to make me smaller, more apologetic, more willing to sign things quickly and not ask too many questions, more likely to eventually leave on my own so no one would have to explain why they'd pushed me. It worked for a while. By late March, I had started looking at apartment listings on my phone at night, the way you look at an exit sign in a room that's gotten too warm to breathe in. I told myself I was being proactive. I did not yet let myself think the word escape. Then, on the first Tuesday in April, everything came apart in the space of about 90 seconds, in the kitchen, over a spilled cup of coffee that Priya did not bother to wipe up. You know, she said, setting the mug down hard enough that the coffee sloshed over the rim and pooled on the counter unaddressed. You'd last about 2 days on your own, Dorothy. Maybe you should think about what that says. Marcus, without looking up from his phone, actually laughed. Let her try. Might be good for her. I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as a door quietly closing on a room I'd been trying to keep open through sheer force of will. I looked toward the stairs and saw Eli standing at the top in his pajamas, small hands gripping the railing, his face doing the thing children's faces do when they understand, suddenly and completely, that the adults around them are not who they thought they were. I said nothing. I have found, over 70 years of living, that some battles are not worth the breath it takes to fight them in front of a child who is already frightened enough. I picked up the smaller of my 2 suitcases, €1, the one with my medication, my late husband's watch, and the folder of daycare records that had somehow impossibly become the most stable thing in my life, €1, and I walked out the front door into an April that was colder than it had any right to be. They did not walk me to the car. Marcus did not offer to help carry my bag down the icy front steps, the same steps I would have once salted myself, out of habit, out of care, before anyone in that house had even woken up. I sat in the driver's seat of my own car for 11 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to put the key in the ignition. What I did not know, sitting in that cold car in that driveway, was that the eviction wasn't the beginning of what had been done to me. It was closer to the end of it. The real theft had started weeks earlier, in a study with a half-open door, in a folder of papers I couldn't read without my glasses, in 100 small permissions I'd handed over because the people asking for them shared my last name. I checked into a Best Western off the highway that night with the last of the cash in my purse. I told myself I'd use the time to think, to plan, to figure out an apartment, a next step, some small dignified version of the rest of my life. I had no idea, not even a flicker of one, that the next morning would begin with a letter that would explain, in the driest possible legal language, exactly what my own son and his wife had already done to me. The motel room smelled like carpet cleaner and old cigarette smoke someone had tried, unsuccessfully, to mask. I slept badly, the way you do in a bed that isn't yours, in a body that still aches in places it never used to. I woke at 6, made a cup of instant coffee with the little machine bolted to the desk, and told myself out loud in the empty room that today would be practical. Groceries. A call to my doctor's office to update my address. A serious look at what an apartment might cost. The front desk clerk handed me my mail around €9. I'd had it forwarded from Marcus's house the week before, some instinct telling me not to leave a paper trail sitting on someone else's kitchen counter. There were 3 envelopes. 2 were nothing €1, a coupon circular. A renewal notice for a magazine I'd forgotten I subscribed to. The third had the return address of a lending company I did not recognize, the kind of clean corporate logo designed to look reassuring, the kind that makes you trust a piece of paper before you've read a single word of it. I want you to sit with me in that motel room for a moment, because I need you to understand how ordinary the moment felt right up until it wasn't. I opened the letter the way you open anything you assume is routine, €1 half distracted. Already thinking about my grocery list. Congratulations on the disbursement of your home equity conversion mortgage. Reverse mortgage. I read that sentence 4 times. I do not exaggerate when I tell you the words simply refused to arrange themselves into something that made sense. I had never applied for a reverse mortgage. I barely understood what one was beyond the commercials that used to play in the background of Marcus and Priya's living room, €1, smiling seniors in cardigans, a soothing voiceover promising they could unlock the equity in their home without ever having to sell it. Marcus used to scoff at those ads. Only desperate people sign those, he'd said once. You're giving the bank your house for pennies. I flipped to the second page with hands that had started very slightly to shake. Asterisk initial disbursement amount. $310,000. Funds transferred to account ending in 6214. Asterisk. That was not my checking account. I stared at those 4 digits for a long time trying to place them, and then with a cold sinking clarity I remembered. It was the joint household account Priya had set up for convenience back in February. The one she'd suggested I add as a payee on my Social Security direct deposit, just to simplify things while you're recovering. I had thought I was making my life easier. I had been handing someone a door. The letter continued in the flat, indifferent language that only official documents seem to manage. Asterisk subsequent withdrawal authorized by borrower. Funds transferred within 48 hours of initial disbursement. Asterisk. Withdrawn. Already. $310,000, deposited and emptied out again before I'd even known the loan existed. I called the lending company's customer service line with hands that would not fully steady, and I sat on hold for 41 minutes, the motel room's heater rattling in the silence, before a representative named Angela finally picked up. I explained as calmly as I could manage that I had never applied for this loan. She was kind in the practiced, careful way of someone who has clearly had this exact conversation before and knows how it usually ends. I understand this is distressing, ma'am, she said. But our records show the application was completed online, with your social security number, date of birth, and a notarized signature. We also have a video verification call on file, which is standard for loans of this size. A video call? I said. I never did a video call with anyone from your company. There was a pause, the particular pause of someone reading something on a screen they didn't expect to have to explain. It's dated March 22nd, she said. 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Would you like me to send you the reference number? So you can request the recording. March 22nd. I remembered March 22nd. I had been at a physical therapy appointment that afternoon, sitting in a waiting room with 3 other patients, my phone in my purse the entire time untouched. I requested everything €1, the recording, the application documents, the notarized signature page. Angela transferred me to a fraud specialist who transferred me again, and by the time I hung up, 90 minutes had passed and I had learned 3 things that rearranged everything I thought I understood about the last 5 months of my life. First, the loan application had used my social security number, my date of birth, and a copy of my driver's license, €1, a copy I now remember Priya had asked to make, for insurance purposes back in January, right around the time she'd started her transparency chart in the pantry. Second, the notarized signature matched mine with an accuracy that, the fraud specialist admitted delicately, some of our security team have flagged as unusually precise, €1 down to the small tremor in the downstroke of my capital D, a tremor that had only developed after my hip surgery, when my hand shook slightly whenever I wrote for more than a few seconds. Third, and this is the one that made the room actually tilt around me, the video verification call. I asked them to describe it to me, since they couldn't email the file immediately, and the specialist read from her notes. A woman's face, well lit, speaking clearly, confirming her identity and her intent to take out the loan. My face, my voice, or something built to sound enough like it. Except I had never sat for that call, never spoken those words, never been anywhere near a laptop on the afternoon of March 22nd. I thought of Priya's phone, always angled a little too deliberately whenever she recorded me €1 reading bedtime stories to Eli, laughing at something on the television, telling old daycare stories at dinner that she claimed she wanted for the family archive. I thought of the face swap filters she used constantly on her own social media, the joke she'd made once, almost proudly, about how she could make a cardboard box look like a celebrity, with the right software. I had laughed along with her at the time. I had thought it was simply a modern parlor trick, the kind of thing young people did for fun. I understood now that I had been living inside her rehearsal footage for months without knowing it. Vacate. I had vacated it in November, the day the ambulance took me to the hospital, and I hadn't been back since, my recovery stretching longer than either Marcus or I had anticipated. The clock, I now understood with a cold, precise horror, had already been running for 5 months. They had not needed to hurt me. They had not needed anything as clumsy or as risky as that. They only needed me gone €1 from the house, from my own paperwork, from any position where I might notice what was happening before the 12 months quietly expired, and Larkspur, along with every memory it held, became the lender's property, no inheritance dispute required. No fingerprints anywhere near the transaction except my own forged ones. Old people should disappear quietly, Priya had said to me once, smiling, like it was a joke everyone in the room understood. It hadn't been a joke. It had been a timeline. I want to tell you what I did next because this is the part of the story where I stopped being the person things happened to and became, finally, the person who did something about it. I did not go back to that motel room and cry, though I understood, sitting in the bank parking lot, that I had every right to. I called my late husband's cousin Rita, who had spent 30 years as a paralegal at a firm 2 towns over and who had, on more than one occasion at family gatherings, told me flatly that everyone should have an elder law attorney's number in their phone, whether they think they need one or not. I had laughed her off at the time. I called her that afternoon with a shaking voice and told her everything, and she did not laugh at me even once. Rita got me in front of an actual elder law attorney within 48 hours, a sharp, unhurried woman named Denise Okafor, who listened to my entire story without interrupting and then said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. Dorothy, what you're describing isn't a family disagreement. It's elder financial abuse, and in this state, it's a felony. The next month was the hardest of my life, harder in some ways than the loss of my husband, because grief, at least, doesn't ask you to relive the wound over and over in front of strangers with clipboards. I filed a formal fraud report with my bank and with the lending company, both of which froze the disbursed funds pending investigation, since the withdrawal trail €1 traced, eventually, to a shell LLC Priya had registered under her maiden name 3 years earlier quietly, long before my hip ever broke €1, turned out to be far less untraceable than she'd apparently believed. I filed a police report for identity theft. I filed with the state's Adult Protective Services Division, who opened their own parallel investigation once I described the power of attorney, the video call I'd never given, and the signature with the tremor no forger should have known to include. Denise Okafor helped me file an emergency petition to revoke the power of attorney entirely, and a judge granted it within 2 weeks, citing what she called, in language I found almost unbearably validating, clear and convincing evidence of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The reverse mortgage was voided. Larkspur, my husband's house, our house, the house that held 30 years of Sunday mornings and Christmas mornings and the exact spot in the kitchen where I taught Marcus to make his grandmother's biscuits, stayed mine. The forensic accountant Denise brought in traced the Shell LLC back through 6 months of digital breadcrumbs €1. The deepfake video call built from over 40 hours of footage lifted from Priya's own phone, footage of me reading bedtime stories, laughing at dinner, telling old daycare tales for the family archive. 40 hours. She had been building the tools to erase me for longer than I had even been living in that guest bedroom. The forgery on the loan documents matched, pixel for pixel in the digital signature metadata. A signature generation app installed on her laptop the same week she'd asked to photocopy my driver's license, for insurance purposes. Marcus, when he was finally confronted €1 first by Adult Protective Services, then by his own attorney, who I understand advised him rather bluntly to cooperate fully once the evidence was laid out €1, claimed he hadn't known the full extent of what Priya had built. I believe, God help me, that this might even be partly true. I believe he signed the power of attorney without reading it because it was easier not to know, because carelessness is a kind of cowardice that doesn't require you to ever call yourself a thief. But not reading a document does not undo the years of small cruelties that came before it. €1, the walking expense report comments, the transparency chart in the pantry, the casserole money joke that stopped being funny the moment I understood what it had been covering for. Carelessness built the door. He walked through it just the same. Priya was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly person, identity theft, and forgery. I will not pretend the legal process was fast or satisfying in the tidy way it might be in a movie. €1. It dragged through nearly a year of hearings, continuances, a plea agreement that felt, in the moment, like less than what had been taken from me. But it was something. It was a court, a judge, a system finally saying out loud what I had known alone in a cold car in a driveway. That what had been done to me was not a family disagreement, not a difference in financial philosophy, not an old woman failing to understand modern life. It was theft, dressed up in a smile and a eucalyptus candle. The part of this story I still think about most, though, isn't the courtroom. It's Eli. He was 7 when I left that house, and he is 9 now, and for the first several months after everything came apart, Marcus €1 separated from Priya by that point, the marriage another casualty of what she'd built. €1 brought him to see me every other Saturday at my little rented apartment 2 towns over, the one I moved into while Larkspur's locks were being changed and its paperwork was being untangled. Eli would climb up onto my couch the same way he used to climb into the guest bed, and tell me long meandering stories and ask more than once in the direct way only children manage, "Are you gonna live with us again, Grandma?" I told him the truth, gently, the way you tell a child something true without handing them more weight than they can carry. That grown-ups sometimes make choices that hurt other people, even people they love, and that it wasn't his fault, any of it, not one single piece. Larkspur is mine again, fully, cleanly, the mortgage voided and the deed restored. And I moved back in the spring after the ruling came down. I planted tulip bulbs along the front walk that first week, the same bed I'd let go fallow the year my hip broke, and I stood there afterward with dirt still under my fingernails, looking at a house that had almost become collateral for someone else's greed. And I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in nearly a year. Safe. Eli has a room here now, the same one his father slept in as a boy, and some weekends when Marcus drops him off, the boy runs straight past his father into the kitchen to see what I'm baking, and for those 10 minutes at least the house sounds exactly the way it used to. €1 full, warm, entirely mine. People sometimes ask me when they hear this story whether I've forgiven Marcus. I tell them the truth, which is that forgiveness and trust are not the same currency, and I am only willing to spend one of them again. I love my son. I am simply no longer willing to be his safety net, his guest bedroom charity case, or his wife's rehearsal footage. I built a life once out of nothing but stubbornness and love, and it turns out I still remember how. Old people should disappear quietly, Priya told me once, smiling as if it were a joke. I did not disappear. I came back to my own front door, planted tulips in the dirt, and made sure that whatever happens to me next, it happens on paper I've read myself with my glasses on in a house that is finally and completely still mine.